Sometimes it feels like they wanna remind me, send all those villains after me. I'm not their hero, but that doesn't mean that I wasn't.
So how's Groove in the Moo been so far?
Groove in the Moo has been very fun. We've only done a couple of shows so far, but it's great. It's really cool for us to get outside of the big cities and play some of the more rural places in Australia. I mean, on one hand, it's just cool to play to new people, and also just to get to see more of Australia.
I suppose Groove in the Moo, playing some country towns and stuff like that. Not a lot of bands, I suppose, that come to Australia. You get to see the actual Australia, I suppose.
Yeah, it's true. It's really, I mean, it's absolutely stunning and beautiful. Even the first show we did was in Maitland, and the second one was in Canberra. And I mean, even just driving from Sydney, I guess in two very opposite directions, I mean, the landscape was like totally different. So we actually feel like we've probably seen more of Australia than a lot of Australians. Definitely.
And I suppose you played one of the most iconic Australian venues, being the Opera House, and that was live streamed. Is there any added pressure when you know it's live streaming?
I think that over the years, like, live stream has sort of gotten more and more popular, so we are seeing it more and more frequently, and so, but it never added any additional pressure to me until recently, where I feel that our audience has grown so much, and there's such a huge international audience that doesn't have any way to see us other than through YouTube videos and a live stream. So now I actually care in a way that I didn't care before. Like, before I was like, it's getting live streamed, like 500 people are gonna watch it. But at the Opera House, I mean, there were hundreds of thousands of, you know, people who ended up tuning in, you know.
So YouTube give you the stats back?
Yeah.
Pretty straight away?
And it's like, you know, it's not like I imagine that people are watching for 2 hours, but I don't care if they watch for 5 seconds when they see us. I want it to look good and it to sound good. So we've started to pay a little more attention, but you know, your number one focus when you're on stage should be the people in front of you, you know, always, 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 always. And the Sydney Opera House is a beautiful and incredible, iconic venue, and my number one goal that night was not to screw it up.
Okay, on to the new album now. What made you decide to make a pop record?
For us, we always want to make records that are different. I really loved The Con and Sainthood, our last two records, but I felt, especially after Sainthood, that it was important that we do something that wasn't expected from us. And you know, it didn't make any difference to me if it was a pop record or it was a metal record. It didn't matter. All I knew is that, you know, whatever great songs we had written, we needed to go in and make something sonically and aesthetically that would surprise people, and that people wouldn't think, you know, oh, is that off of Sainthood or is that off of So Jealous? Like, I just really wanted people to go like, oh my god, this has got to be new from Tegan and Sara. So I think that the pop element, or the pop side of it, is more about production for us and where we're really interested in taking our music right now. You know, when we were making albums like So Jealous and The Con in the mid-2000s, you know, those records were more reflective of what we were listening to and the production values that we were really interested in at the time. And bands like Arcade Fire, and I remember being really interested in records from the 80s that had more of a trashy sort of, like I'm thinking bands like The Replacements and Dinosaur Jr. Like, I was thinking about like lo-fi recording, band vibe, really dynamic, like super crunchy songs, like those kinds of things. And now I'm like all about like the cleanest, like the 80s, like Dire Straits records, and you know, pop music right now, production that I'm really interested in, like Alicia Keys and Robin and those kinds of things. So I think that the pop record side of it is really just more about like what we're excited about right now and the influence of music that's happening currently.
Did you have people telling you that you wouldn't be able to pull this off?
No, I think we're really lucky. I mean, Sarah and I surround ourselves with really amazing, you know, artist-friendly people, from our record label to our agents to our managers. I mean, we're really lucky in that we have grown to be, I think, very well-respected artists, and I think that all the collaboration we've done over the last 6 years with dance artists and in the pop world, I think it's sort of shown a lot of the people around us that we had more than one trick up our sleeve, you know, and I think that you know, Sarah and I weren't sort of willy-nilly just like changing directions. I mean, I think that it has been a natural evolution over the last 6 years, and I think that once the demos started to come out, so Sarah and I, like, we spend an enormous amount of time writing at home and tracking. I mean, not just like me singing with an acoustic guitar, like 50 or 60 tracks of ideas, piano hooks, keyboards, synths, background vocals. Then I said to Sarah that by the time the record label and our managers hear our demos, you know, they're really hearing our vision, you know, they're hearing the ideas that we have. And so nobody was
having to wrap their minds around something that they didn't hear. Like they were hearing it and going, oh, this is fantastic. Yeah, let's find a producer who can help take this to the next level. So luckily there was no naysayers. And the few, you know, when we released the first single, there was certainly a lot of conversation, mainly in the media, but even with some of our diehard fans, you know, saying, oh, it sounds so commercial and it sounds really poppy and I don't know if I like it. But I think once the record came out and people heard what a diverse amount of music was on the record and how much depth was on the record, and you know, that it was sort of that same quintessential Tegan and Sara, I think people just kind of got on board, which is great. You know, it's good for us. We got to challenge ourselves and we still won.
Do you think that heading down the more mainstream path leaves you more exposed?
I feel like, you know, it's interesting because when we released our first record, it was right at the beginning of the internet. So, and I remember we had like a fan email address, like, I don't know what it was, like info@teganandsara.com, whatever it was back then. And I remember going to the internet cafe and checking our fan email. And this is like 2000, let's call it. And I remember we would get like maybe 5 or 6 emails a week, you know, from like random people who had seen our video on a Much Music, like our video channel or something. And I remember one of the first emails that we got was someone being like, I hate you. I hate your band. I hate your video. I think your music sucks. I can't believe you have a record deal. It was like one of the very, very first things that I ever read at info@teganandsara.com. That was in 2000. We had probably sold about 1.2 records. We had like 8 fans, and we were already getting criticism. And I think it taught me really early on that it doesn't matter if you are Justin Bieber and you have a monkey and you sold 1 billion records, or you are Tegan and Sara and you've sold nothing and you're just like 2 kids like starting out in the music business, that if you look for criticism and you look for negative feedback, you will find it. It's there, it exists. And so for me, the mainstream is not, it doesn't necessarily mean we're more vulnerable or we're more open to like the bad things that, you know, people will say or anything like that. It just, I think, has meant that we have to sort of like, we have to beef up our defense mechanisms a little bit, and we have to also be prepared for the dialogue that happens when you are
well, part of a generation where everybody wants to have an opinion.
Absolutely.
And you have to accept that. Like, I read something online today actually about that NBA player that just came out, and someone wrote, I wonder if he was ready for the negative comments, or if he knew there was going to be so much hatred. And I'm like, I tell this story all the time, but like 3 weeks ago I saw this incredible story about like a grandma who'd gotten all the other grandma friends that she had or whatever, like gathering up all these clothes to donate, and then they were giving the money to the senior center. And in the comment section, like one of the first comments for this beautiful story about all these little grandmas was like, fuck her, bitch. Like, you know, like, fuck those people. I was like, the world's a terrible place. It's going to come to an end soon. Armageddon is coming. We're terrible people. Like, the human race is mean and awful and judgmental. And you know what? Then I calmed down and my heart rate lowers, and
But that's the internet, isn't it?
That's the internet. And so, like, it's really tough to say. Like, early on in the record cycle, I was like, are there really a lot more people disliking our band? And then I was like, no, it's just we're more places on the internet now, right? So those same awful trolls that sit around all day making fun of poor little grandmas who are just donating their clothes for the senior center.
It's gotta be the same people.
It's the same person, I bet you. So I don't know, Sarah's right, you kind of beef up your defense mechanism. You just are busy. I don't care.
Also,
go ahead, write something on the internet.
Also, we're older, you know, like I always liken the internet to a gang of teenagers outside of like a 7-Eleven. Like, I'm like, the internet is like that scary, intimidating group of kids.
Just walk by and get your Slurpee.
You walk by and you just ignore them. Doesn't matter what they fling at you.
They won't fling anything.
They're hanging out at a 7-Eleven parking lot. You're just a grown-up going to where you go when you're a grown-up. So I think that being more mainstream or more successful, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it just, to me, it's like, it's just, you have to focus more on the positive sides of things and the places that you're going and the things that you're doing, and
hang out with more grandmas.
Hang out with more grandmas that are donating clothes for no just good reason, just because they have good hearts.
You're stupid old bitch or something. It was something absurd.
Can you imagine?
Like,
you're both in stable relationships. How did such a good breakup album come about?
I always say that there was this point when we put out our last record, Sainthood, where one of our big diehard fans had said, how could you possibly write a good record? You're happy. But the reality is that when you're happy, you oftentimes are more focused. So depression and sadness and heartbreak can oftentimes make you a bit obsessive and crazy and disjointed and all over the place. And I don't know that, for me at least, my best work hasn't necessarily come out of heartbreak. It's come from the peacefulness that comes from finally getting to a point where you feel settled. Then once you're feeling that peacefulness and settlement, I turn around and I start looking at the path of destruction that lays behind me and start writing about it. And I feel like with Sainthood, I almost kind of had pulled back from wanting to look at that devastation, and this time with Heartthrob, I looked even further back and started to look at maybe the origins of romance and love for me. Like, when did I start to feel romantic and excited about people? When did I start to have crushes? Like, when did those first fires, you know, start burning inside of me? You know, Sara had pushed me to try to write more, you know, outside of the box than I ever had before, and I realized that romance and love had some of that same intensity and craziness and anxiousness that heartbreak gives you too. So yeah, so I think it's all about your perspective. You know, you can be happy and still look at the devastation. If anything, you can actually see it probably clearer out of it.
I don't know what's going to happen, because the one thing that I have started to notice is that people, like, at some point when the perception about your band is that, or just about your life, I think this happens with actors too sometimes, nobody wants to hear you whinge about your life when it seems like your life is great. And, you know, when we were sort of like struggling artists and we were still sort of like fighting our way in the music industry, I think there was like a, they're like me and they have broken hearts too, and we could, like, we're buddies, you know, whatever. And I've started to, I actually started thinking about this. There's a comedian, Louis C.K., and I saw him do a performance recently, and he was talking about how he flies in business class and he gets paid all this money to talk for like an hour and tell jokes, and how his life isn't like everybody else's life, and like he is, like, his life is better than everybody else's life. And it was so funny in the audience, and I started to laugh, and then I realized, oh my God, like, in a weird way, how much longer will people put up with us bitching about our relationships, you know, before they're just like, oh, shut up already about your stupid relationship.
I listened to the album without paying too much attention to the singles. Was I'm Not Your Hero ever a chance of being one of the main singles originally?
In the UK, it came out as
yeah, we just sort of had it as like a first look kind of track.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think we always knew that Closer probably was a little bit more in touch with what was happening on radio, but we really do feel like any of these songs, given the right amount of time and effort, maybe they could work on, you know, radio or whatever. I would love to, my goal for this record actually is to do a video for every single song on the album. You know, we don't have to necessarily work the hell out of the album like it's Thriller or anything like that, but I do feel like each song is really special, and I would love to see them have, you know, visual and audio tie-ins, you know, so that...
And you're playing the whole album, aren't you?
Oh yeah, I'm playing the whole album. Yeah, which is kind of partly why I want to do a video for everything, is that I think every time we sort of wrap an album cycle, we like to do some kind of multimedia project. Like our last record, we wrapped up with a DVD and like these documentaries, and on the con, we wrapped that cycle up with like a multi-book series that we did in Australia and New Orleans and all this kind of thing. So I've already been thinking, like, how will we wrap up Heartthrob, and maybe there's something there.
And it seems like, from our website point of view, we're always interviewing good Canadian bands and musicians. Why is that?
Lots of support.
Yeah, I think it just starts from a place of there's just been a really amazing history of Canadian music, so I think it inspires each generation to make great music and try to be sort of on that level with so many great bands. And I think because of that, the Canadian government is just like overwhelmingly supportive. Over the last, you know, 10 plus years of Sara and I's career, we've probably received maybe $500,000 in funding between tours and videos and you know, just an incredible amount of support. And it doesn't stop there. They support record labels, they support managers. Like, there's just a whole infrastructure.
There's incentives for radio to play Canadian music.
Yeah, like, it's just, there's just so many, the list is endless, so there's just an enormous amount of support for Canadian artists. But I actually heard a conversation between a bunch of Canadian artists years ago about why they think that so much great Canadian art comes out, or so many great bands come out of Canada, but specifically why it comes out of the prairies. And they were just saying straight up, it's because it's absolutely miserable and cold, and that people are all just inside, you know, in their garages, in their rooms, like playing music. That it's not, you know, besides hockey, that sports are a big deal, but so much of the year, especially in the prairies, you just have nothing better to do, so everybody picks up a guitar, starts a band. So I thought that was really interesting. There's definitely something to be said for the cold Canadian winter on the prairies and finding something to do.
Awesome. Well, thanks for speaking to AMH TV today.
Thank you.
Like the first time, you never really